Folks, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited. It's going to be us in today's session, so I'm calling it a 90-minute power hour. I guess it's not an hour, it's over an hour. But my goal is to make it as interactive as possible. I want to make sure we're getting and making the most out of our time together. Of course, I'll introduce myself a bit later, but I just want to preface by saying this is going to be, or I envision this to be as interactive as possible. So I'm going to pause throughout. I'm going to ask for feedback from you folks. If you have a place to write down notes, so whether it's a phone or a notebook or even in your conference manual, I welcome that. My hope is that you get as much as you possibly can from this session, just because I want to, make it helpful, because I do appreciate your time, and I know there's a lot of concurrent sessions. So anyways, I appreciate it. And with that, we are all here to talk about compensation. So before we get into it, I'd love to take a little bit of stock in terms of who's in the room today. So we can do just like a hands up, hands down, finger. You can say, hey, but more so, let's see who's in the room today. So first and foremost, folks, is anyone here have an actual compensation program or strategy in place, but you need to revamp it, and that's why you're here today? Okay, great, hello. Second, you have been tasked to design compensation for your team, but this is your very first time, so you're starting from scratch. Anyone? Amazing, okay. You need to make changes to your current compensation program today, but gaining board approval or gaining team buy-in is proving to be a challenge. Anyone in that boat? Okay, great. And you're just here to think about how other progressive organizations are designing compensation, or you're here to more so get inspired? Okay, amazing, exciting, well, welcome. So with that, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to introduce myself. So my name is Trisha Neogi. My pronouns are she and her, and I am from the team at Bright and Early. So Bright and Early is a modern HR consultancy that's based in Toronto. We work with organizations across Canada, as well as the US and globally in some states. And we really help build progressive people programs. So anything around HR, that's onboarding, performance management. My specialization is compensation, that's why we're here today. But we also support teams from a strategic HR capacity. So if you want to design more progressive programs, or think about how to design things a bit differently, or maybe you want to revise your entire org structure, or think about how to motivate your talent a bit differently, those are some of the programs that we do. And more recently, we've been working with a lot more nonprofit organizations. We at Bright and Early are very values aligned as a team, so we like to work with mission-driven, impactful organizations, which makes a lot of sense why we work with a lot of nonprofits and social impact organizations. But from a comp standpoint, it's been very, very interesting. I mean, I don't have to explain it to you folks, you're experiencing it yourselves, but over the last 2 years, there's been an incredible shift in compensation, especially for nonprofits. In the age of digitization, there's a lot more data out there. Employees are getting a lot more access to how different organizations are paying. Is this kind of resonating with folks? Are we feeling it? Yeah. People are probably asking a lot more questions around compensation, and there's a lot of constraints that you folks experience as well, which I know that there's no surprise to that. But how are we dealing with compensation today? And that's a lot of the projects I've been working on. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to share some of my learnings today, but also come together and actually build something tangible. So my goal with today's session is for everyone to actually walk away with an idea of your own compensation philosophy. So whether you're thinking about redesigning your existing philosophy, you're creating one from scratch, or you're here to learn. My hope is to actually have all of you folks leave with something tangible. So, oh, by the way, that's my lovely team. So cute, we're small and mighty. And then in terms of community guidelines, you'll get what you put into it. So like I said, my vision, my goal is for this to be as interactive as possible. So if folks can kind of chime in with their own experiences, their own questions, their own struggles they're facing, we can kind of use this as a live collaboration process. A lot of you folks here today are on a shared mission, and it's an important mission. So it would be great if we can all kind of band together and ideate on a more progressive and inclusive future. And also I'd love to hear what you folks are doing. Some folks are doing some really interesting and different things with compensation. It's a good space to ideate together. This is also, as I keep mentioning, it's an interactive session, so I'll be posting questions throughout the session. I'll also leave a lot of break for you folks to take notes. As I mentioned, we're going to build something together, so I'll definitely leave time and space for everyone to note take. And lastly, we're here to build a more equitable future. So our goal at Bright and Early is building progressive programs. My entire goal, I actually realized I didn't actually introduce myself. I really believe in equitable futures. It's something that's really important to me. I've experienced pay inequity a lot in my career, and that's actually what made me very passionate about compensation. I definitely fell into compensation. It was not something I specialized in when I was kind of practicing internal HR, but after experiencing it personally time and time again, as well as seeing my peers experience it, as well as people, specifically people in racialized communities, watching that happen, it made me passionate to work on this and kind of solve for a more progressive future. So I've been designing compensation for the last 5 years for organizations at all sizes and scales. So my title is a lead compensation at Bright and Early, as well as a senior consultant. And I've also just recently graduated from inclusive design research program. So I went to OCAD over the last 3 years, and I recently have a graduate degree in design, and that was really interesting because I wanted to think about compensation from a inclusive design perspective. Can we design things differently? How can we think about AI and protecting people with disabilities? So all of that together has kind of led me here, where I want to talk and share more about how we can build a better future. Okay, so another interactive, we can do the 5-finger activity if folks are familiar with this. Once again, 5 fingers, you can raise your hand, whatever feels comfortable, but I'm gonna have statements, and it would be great to kind of see where people land. So folks can kind of have 5 fingers, or at least raise their hand. Put a finger down if you oversee or administer compensation changes for your organization, so you're responsible for comp decisions. Okay, great. Put a finger down if you've received feedback from your current staff or candidates that your org comp right now is not competitive enough. Okay. Put a finger down if you're actually losing talent to other organizations. Okay. And put a finger down if you feel like you can't keep up with changes in compensation. So things are changing way too quickly. Okay. And then lastly, put a finger down if you do not know how to work with your budgetary constraints. Anyone with the 0? Be proud, we're 0. Okay, awesome. I see a few fingers raised, that's great. This was really to help ground in today's session, so we're all kind of in the same boat once again. And like I said, this is a really great opportunity to share in each other's experiences. So folks are coming from different sizes and scales, and it'd be cool to learn from each other. And then, as I mentioned with Bright and Early, we've been around for about 7+ years, and we've worked with over hundreds of different organizations. And specifically, we've run engagement surveys for over 100 different orgs. And the most common piece of feedback we hear time and time again is no one is happy with their pay. So I want to let you know that no matter how much work you do, no matter how much effort and time and investment you put, someone will always have feedback on it. So the goal is not to make everyone happy with it. If anything, it's more about creating an equitable system. So we're trying to design a process where it's fair, it's equitable, it's defensible, and it makes sense, so that you might have people that may not agree with it, but at least you can defend it and it's rooted in something. And that's really the main point of my work with compensation, but also with today's session, is for you folks to walk away feeling really, really confident in what you've designed, so that, once again, you can defend it and proudly talk about it. So with compensation is extremely contentious, as I'm sure we all know, because it's someone's livelihood. Stats Canada actually reported that the non-profit industry has seen a 50% increase since 2010. This was awesome. I didn't actually realize this. So there has been significant movement in the nonprofit industry, and yet nonprofits still have that reputation, or hold that reputation, of employees needing to take a pay cut in order to work in a values-led organization. As folks a part of those organizations, are you feeling that sentiment is still reigning true? Do you feel it personally with yourselves? Yeah? Okay. So as pay transparency is becoming more prevalent and as hiring becomes more specialized, I've seen a lot more nonprofits struggle with retaining their specialized talent due to salaries. Especially at this conference, we're speaking to folks at the table, and that's exactly kind of the sentiment they're sharing. Hiring and attracting talent is becoming a lot more difficult. I also often hear leaders say how surprised they are about how quickly compensation has changed. So as part of my role, I work with a lot of executive team members as well as directors in designing compensation programs. And the feedback I typically get is, wow, the market rate, I didn't realize it was like this. When I was working at this role, salaries were $20,000, $30,000 less. And to me, that seems right. To me, it doesn't look like we should be paying at this rate. And sure, that might be the case for when you once held that role, but like I said, the market has changed exponentially. Even in the last 5 years, we've seen dramatic increases. So it's not even just, if you held that role before, it's more so there's a change in time, and if we're not getting behind that change and trying to get ahead of it, essentially we're going to get left behind, and your very important mission is going to get left behind as well. So we definitely want to make sure we're trying to stay ahead of that curve there. I want to also validate you folks for 2.5 seconds, because you folks in nonprofits have an extremely important competitive advantage, and that is you are mission driven. So at Bright and Early, we work with not only nonprofits, but we work with tech companies, government, as well as other agencies. And these organizations try very hard to be mission driven, whereas for you folks, it comes naturally. So you already have that built in you, and that's why people come to work for you. So that's already there. It's about communicating that and developing that strategy to communicate that well and make it defensible and root it in equitable pay. Okay. So I also want to note that, of course, your constraints are sizable, but you're not necessarily bound by them. So I don't want to kind of stand here and explain your constraints to you. I feel like that's the most consulting thing I could possibly do. You feel your own constraints. But what I can tell you is that, no matter kind of what avenue you take or where you go, you're always going to experience those blockers and constraints. I know budget is like the biggest one, especially when you go through that process of trying to get your budget approved. And maybe it's approved for the next 3 years, but compensation has doubled. And then what do you do when everyone's unhappy? You're always going to face that. But you're not necessarily bound by them if you root it in a specific mission. So we're going to get into this now, but this is called your employer value proposition. If you can root it in your value proposition, you can be more flexible with your constraints. I know it's easier said than done, but creating your confident compensation structure always starts with intention. So it's pretty common practice to look at your peers in the market and what other organizations are doing and compare. Are folks doing that right now? Is that where we're getting our market data? Yeah? Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I do that. But as a compensation practitioner, that's where I start. But I never use that as my kind of truth. I use it to inform my research, and I use it to inform how I build bands. But it's not kind of the end all be all. And that's one of the misconceptions I see with a lot of smaller organizations or organizations doing this for the first time. It's kind of trying to match competitors or trying to match their peers in the market. And that's, one way to do it to get started, but we're missing out on a really important factor here, which is your intention. Who do you want to be known for? When employees are talking about your organization, what do you want them to say about you? I'm sure, all of you have a very specific brand in the industry as well. Similar to internal, what's your employer brand? How do your employees talk about you? So over the next 90 minutes, we're going to work together and connect your specific employer value proposition and design a compensation philosophy together. So like I said, if you have that pen and paper, this is a really good opportunity to take notes and design something together, because my hope is that everyone can walk away with a philosophy. So in terms of our agenda today, we're going to start with defining our EVP, our employer value proposition. We're going to start with compensation, then look at career and culture. I call this like the trifecta. Whenever I deliver this training to organizations, I have like a circle. I didn't do the circle here today, but imagine a circle. We're also going to talk about navigating your constraints and then gaining buy-in and end with Q&A. My hope is that we can just ask questions as it comes. We're a smaller group here. We have a lot of time together. So see it as a collaborative space. If you have questions, please pause me. I welcome that. I want to hear from you, but we'll also save time at the end for questions as well. Okay, so far so good. How are we feeling? Yeah, okay. Thank you for the woo. Awesome. So compensation isn't just salaries. It's about all the monetary ways an organization invests in its staff. So cash compensation refers to salaries, variable pay structures, so bonuses, as well as retirement plans. And then non-cash compensation refers to the indirect investments an organization will make. So for example, planned benefits, paid time off, leaves, or one-time perks like a home office setup or work flexibility or remote first organization. I always recommend organizations taking a total compensation or total rewards approach when designing their compensation strategies because your total rewards package directly communicates your employer value proposition. So it literally tells people what you value and what you want to pay for. And then in terms of reflecting those values, in other words, your compensation program tells your candidates and tells your employees who you are and what you value. And it's also extremely action-oriented. So as purpose-driven organizations, everyone in this conference is here to improve their own community in some way and activate change. But in order to activate that change internally, I believe it's really important to ensure you have a strong foundation and build that within your team so that you have kind of that solid foundation. Everyone's aligned, everyone knows the mission, vision, goals, everyone understands how they're being compensated, everyone knows how they grow and develop and receive feedback so that they can go ahead and do their best work and they're not kind of spending their time internally figuring out the internal processes of your organization. So this looks like aligning on your mission, vision, values. It looks like aligning on your culture and getting really clear on that. It looks like how you actually go ahead and make decisions and creating protocols to ensure you're actually sticking to your values. I call this getting your house in order. So essentially getting strategic, clear, and fair about compensation is an actionable first step in actually getting your house in order because pay is the top priority in everyone's mind, especially in this day and age. We're all experiencing it. We're all thinking about pay at all times. And I'm not saying we have to directly match inflation. That's challenging, but we're all thinking about it regardless. So if we're getting ahead of the conversation and actually bringing our staff into that conversation, it creates for uncomfortable conversation, but it lets people know that you're thinking about them and you're in it with them as well. And you can always design something together. Some of the best compensation strategies that I've designed is actually a co-design process with staff. It sounds maybe unconventional, but they have really great feedback and they have excellent ideas of how to think about pay differently, and they see it from their peers as well. So when you have that sound foundation created, you can always kind of involve other staff to design something meaningful. And in terms of how this actually looks actionable, for example, if you value well-being or if you value work balance or inclusion, you might offer flexible working hours or say a 4-day work week. Or if you value accessibility, you may be a remote first organization and you're completely digital and offer a parental leave top-up or gender affirming care through your benefits program. If you value transparency, you might actually have a transparent wage grid or salary bands or disclose how you make compensation decisions to your staff. And the thing about compensation is that you can get really, really creative. So all the examples I just listed, by no means is that supposed to be a laundry list of things you should be doing already. They're just examples of how to put your value in action. And oftentimes they don't actually cost you anything. So this is or monetary wise, this is one of my most favorite parts of my job, especially when designing compensation. We kind of look at what the organization has to offer, we look at the values, and we come up with creative ways to connect the dots. So, maybe we don't have additional funds for a budget and maybe we can't increase salaries this year the way we wanted to, but how can we leverage your existing benefits and re-communicate it to staff and then also show them a plan? So, maybe this year we're going to do X, but then next year, this is our phased approach to get to Y and Z. And then that way your employees have a really clear idea of what to expect. So in terms of your compensation philosophy, the purpose, essentially it's an overview of a company's compensation strategy and what employees can actually expect. Is this are people generally familiar with the philosophy? Do you folks have one internally? To people that have one, yes? Okay, great, perfect. I'd actually love to hear from folks that already have one. Do you find it's useful to have a philosophy? Yeah? Oh, yes? Kind of? Yeah.
It's handy to have, but it's not necessarily something the team focuses on. Right? It's in the handbook. You read the handbook when you start, and then you kind of forget about
That's
it.
it.
Perception.
Yeah. And then one more clarifying question. When you make decisions with on compensation, do you refer back to your philosophy?
Yes, and it's out of date.
Perfect. We're at the right plot, space. Awesome. Anyone else want to comment on their philosophy? What works for them, what doesn't? No? Okay, well, thank you for volunteering as tribute. So, kind of as mentioned, this philosophy is an employee-facing document for people. It should be reviewed annually to ensure decisions are aligning with the intention. And it is an employee's tool for understanding how compensation decisions are being made and bring transparency forward. And it's also meant to hold organizations accountable for what they say they're going to do. So these are some key philosophy outcomes. People leaders are informed and understand total compensation strategy. They're equipped with the information they need to communicate the strategy. All decisions are rooted in equity and are defensible and justifiable. That's the hope. And then also we have the foundation to support the team in making sustainable pay decisions. So now that we've grounded in the importance of having a philosophy, we're going to spend the rest of the time actually creating one together. So as mentioned, this part's going to be super interactive, so I hope you can kind of write notes in a way that you can refer back to later. Okay. So let's start with the goal of your compensation program. All this talk of intention, we need to start with talking about yours. So I'd like for folks to take a moment and note down what you want your compensation program to say about you. What do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known for the highest paying organization, the organization that dispels all the rumors against nonprofits? Do you want to be the most balanced? So you're known for offering the best work-life balance. Do you want to be 100% transparent? You can be ambitious here. This is meant to be a little bit dreaming, but yeah, note the thing you want to be known for. Okay. Anyone want to share? Yeah, go for it.
I just came up with a list that was fair, competitive, and flexible.
Nice.
But then I wrote a note saying, but I'd really like to pay in the top 10% of nonprofit organizations, feeling like that's not in the cards. But that came out as something I really like to do.
Yes, I love it. I love to hear it. Amazing, thank you. Yeah.
This is a reflection to the population we work with. It's very diverse, and our workforce are diverse, but our policies, our compensation structure is extremely rigid. So it doesn't recognise, well, I want it to recognise cultural diversity.
Yeah.
So that those who come into the organisation who would like to have time off perhaps to recognise their cultural holidays, as opposed to fixing it rigidly to Christmas.
Yeah.
Let's allow that person who may be from India to recognise Diwali instead of Christmas, because that means more to them. But our policy doesn't allow that to be recognised. So I'd like it to be more recognition to cultural.
I love that. That's an excellent idea. Yeah.
I work at an Indigenous nonprofit organization, and like what this gentleman was saying, like I want it to be flexible and holistic, so that it's not just compensation. Like those other non-cash compensation aspects are really important as well, because like I don't know if you guys deal with this, but funding isn't endless.
No.
And the amount that we have to pay our employees isn't always our choice. And so when we can allow those changes and be innovative, I think like that's what we have to focus on, because we can't change what we can't change.
Yeah, exactly. We have to work within the constraints we're given, but that's the creative part. That's the fun part. Yeah. Any other ideas? Anything else? Yeah.
I just put a fair and transparent organization that values their employees at all levels.
Love. Great. Yeah.
I've had conversations before with employees who are interested in changing organizations because the wage is different or it appears different on paper. And I think that it's important to have a clear and understandable compensation program. Because at times I've opened up another job posting and compared to the compensation at my agency. And when you get into the details, you realize that the other agency may not be paying more. But it's hard to it's hard to compare pay structures and benefits and all these kinds of things across organizations.
Yeah, you raise a really good point, because something I always say is your compensation program is extremely unique and custom to you. And everyone hates when I say that, because all they want to know is, what are other people paying? And it's like, of course I can give you that information to my best ability, but it's not necessarily about what are other people paying. It's what's important to you, what are you offering, and how much are you willing to invest in those specific areas.
It's also really difficult when you're applying to a new job to obtain the details about the benefits outside of pay.
Yeah, exactly.
Organizations do not provide that information. So it can be very difficult to, go into those details as well.
Yeah, that's fair. Great point. Thank you. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And sometimes I think too, what's hard is that even if we can compare sort of like the value of the two, it depends on the individual, what they value.
Absolutely.
So you can have a great, to your point, they think this job pays more. You compare it, you say, actually, full compensation, we pay more.
Yeah.
But maybe there's certain things that we have in our compensation they don't value.
Exactly.
I don't need benefits, I need more money.
Yeah.
I'm old, I need pension, I don't need, my husband has benefits.
Yeah.
Whatever. So that's a challenge I find that we get in a lot.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if this is a conversation later in your slides, but I'm so curious to know how many of us in a room here are within a unionized environment or a non-bargaining unit, and how our compensation structures may be affected by the collective agreements and policies that we're within.
Yeah, let's do it. Who is part of the unionized environment? Okay, and then non-majority? Okay, good to know.
Can I just, for those who are involved in unionized environments, sorry to take the term, how does the unionized collective agreement marry with your funders? Because if the union decides the staff want a pay rise, but your funding agreement's already in place, how do you then go back? And if they decide then, well, we're going to walk out the job until we get this, I find it rather difficult to kind of make sense of a unionized non-profit environment.
I could kind of talk to that a little bit. So, I mean, we all are, excuse me. There, now I can talk. I run a community services, an emergency shelter and supportive housing. And the union came in 8 years ago when we had 5 staff, and now we have 80. And only the shelter workers are part of the union. Okay, so there's about 30 of them that are part of the union. And when we go into bargaining, which we're going to be going into next year, one of the things that we have said, we cannot give beyond a certain amount. And so they have, I say they have because we don't know what's going to happen next year. Because we can't, if they want us to pay more, we have to lay people off, right? That's where it comes. If they, right? This, right? Which then we're not helping the people that we need to help. So it becomes, it's very, they're trying to get other people, but I mean, nobody even, union, they don't even want it because they're not really using, I don't know if I offended anybody, but it does affect our whole organization because they are the least paid, unfortunately, as we know, the shelter workers. if they go up a certain amount, then everybody has to. So it actually affects the whole organization.
That's
Yeah, even though
very interesting.
we're not held by the union.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You raised a very good point, which I will be getting to in my slides around your wage grids in general and the biggest issue I see with nonprofits and unifying the wage grid. But hold on to that question in case we don't get to it, because then we can have the discussion at the end. Okay, amazing. I'll take one more, yeah?
The hardest part I find is we require maintenance men with certain skills. And we live in oil country. And it is impossible for us to compete with people for salaries and to get qualified individuals to come. I mean, we offer corporate vehicles, we offer cell phones, we offer reduced work week, we offer different forms of compensation, right? To try to attract, and it's very, very difficult because for most younger men, they are looking at buying homes and raising families, and we just can't pay competitive salaries. I don't know what to do. Like, it's, with the office staff and with women and with myself and with management and the admin staff, I think that we can be flexible with things, and we can say, well, we'll offer you 1 week extra paid holidays, or flexible hours. There's different things, but it's really hard with men. Do you have any suggestions?
Loaded question. Let me put a pin on that. I think I would actually put it back on you in terms of what would your, essentially, what do you want people to say about your organization? Like, let's start with the intention. And kind of coming back to this question that roots and grounds in your philosophy. If we know that the industry is changing and we need specific skilled labor, what do you want your program to actually say about you? And it doesn't mean that you make the change immediately. It's probably not going to happen. You're probably going to need a phased approach that takes a few years, but at least you've grounded in that intention of, perhaps we need a skilled workforce that looks a bit different than what we've historically needed to hire for, or historically what it looked like. And this is how we're changing with the time. And that could be your new intention.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. For the sake of time, I am going to move forward, but please hold on to your questions just because we're going to have other opportunity. But I'm loving it. Thank you. Okay, so you have your goal with compensation. I always say that the secret sauce to your compensation is your EVP. It's your employer value proposition. So your EVP is a statement of your values, your rewards, your recognition, the support you provide, as well as the company culture that enables your team to do its best work. So the secret sauce in helping you define your EVP lies in your culture, your total rewards, as well as how you develop your talent. My personal opinion is that I think culture is actually the root of it. So if we focus on culture first, your total rewards, as well as your career and your development and training and all of that, are tools that help communicate your culture throughout. So for example, if you value transparency, your work atmosphere might actually look really collaborative, cross-functional, open, communicative. So your EVP in action may have a total rewards offering that's transparent with not only your pay information, but also training around how compensation decisions are made, or how we're thinking about changing with the times, and how to develop more of an understanding with compensation. And then you have your careers matrix outlining all the different avenues of support and growth. And growth doesn't necessarily mean upwards. I know that's a really big constraint for a lot of organizations. It can mean also laterally. What does it look like to take on more responsibility, more scope, and then also make sure that's recognized through your compensation program? So it's not necessarily about titles, it's more about what are the extra skills that we can take. And then also, what if it looked like communicating openly with your managers during regular one-on-ones? And if you value that transparency, how does it actually show up in your people programs? So now when you say you value transparency, that's an organizational value you have, you can directly connect it with how you're actually living by it. And that's what makes it your kind of unique employer value proposition. You're putting those values in action. So anyone currently doing this right now, anyone actually living their value through their people programs, or excited to share about how they're doing it?
Well, one of the things that we do is I meet quarterly with each one of my team members individually.
Nice.
so that there is a space for us to have any conversations that we need to have, and so that there isn't that perception that if we're talking to someone, if we're talking to each other, that there must be something that's wrong, needs to be fixed. Instead, it's very goal-driven in terms of what is the support that they need in order to be successful in their work, what are the trends that they're seeing, what are the things that are working for them within the workplace culture that we need to invest more into and build onto. So I find it helps to set a tone and live in the values that we say that we hold with our clients internally, because to me that's the basis of service excellence. And being able to do that internally first.
I like that. So your value of service excellence, now you're providing it not only to your external clients, but your internal clients, which are your staff members.
So can people just speak up if they're in front of the room so that people can have questions?
Yeah, sure. Maybe what I'll do a better job at is repeating the question. I can do that.
Right now, one of the things that we do is, depending on budget and where we are, is I will recommend that staff for extra work and, you know, taking on extra work and going above and beyond and whatever, I will recommend bonuses depending on budget to the board, and the board has been very open to that if we have the money sitting there.
Nice. That is lucky. So the recommendation of the bonuses to support that value alignment or that additional recognition.
And it gives the recognition to the people that are doing the extra work, and they feel valued, and it helps to retain them because you're boosting, you're letting them know it's acknowledged. Right? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
I would say I work for an organization that is very robust, and we don't solely do outreach services. So I work for the YMCA, and oftentimes when you do YMCA, you think of a pool and a facility, and that's fine. You can think of it more.
It's community.
There's so much more than that. And from Greater Moncton, we have a very robust outreach services. We do housing support. We do all of these wonderful things. And the unique, I think, position that I've been put in, the role that I now have, that we struggle with, is that oftentimes our outreach team has been a bit isolated from the rest because of, frankly, internal stigmatization of the work that they do and stuff like that. And so I think it's interesting coming into a position and trying to prioritize those things like culture. Like for the first time this year, they're planning to come to the all staff like holiday party.
Oh, nice.
So I think like those little things that have always been around for all departments, and they've always been invited. There was never really that much of a link, and I think that's really exciting. So for us, priority is and always has been that culture piece, but translating culture to compensation in a generation that has grown up in a time when we can't afford to buy houses, we can't afford many of these things, has been proven to be a challenge, and I try to relate with the generation as well, right? Senior leadership, but yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, but I think culture is probably where it retains most.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that ad, and exactly that, like, you folks have a unique value proposition where people are already intrinsically or internally motivated to drive impact and be in your org. Of course, culture is not necessarily always going to pay the bills, but it does have that important component that drives a lot of people. So now it's just about connecting it. Yeah. Okay.
My question, whether to call it the elephant in the room, and actually I'll ask it to everyone. At what point do you, let me backtrack. You talked at the beginning about salary, everybody's going to complain about salary. At what point does the total reward actually make sense to employees when salaries don't matter? Right? Because we can say, here, and Bonnie made the point around, I'm in management, so I have a living wage for staff. We can talk all we want about all the benefits and all of that, but at the end of the day, they will say, just give me more money, then we can talk rewards. And so I'm just wondering if you will get to, at what point, knowing that money in this sector is going to be always a big issue.
What's the minimum? That's a good question. Yeah.
The living wage, and is that what people's experience is? Is it, something else? Because I think that is our issue is we've talked a lot about total rewards. We've talked a lot about the RSPs that we started giving. But folks are still, they will only see you're paying this amount. I can go over there and they'll give me this amount. And so if I match that, will they still be chasing something?
It's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it. It's a longer answer, but I do have a section. We'll get to total rewards. So if you can hold that question, and then I will revisit it then, because I do actually want to get to it, and I think that'll engage a really good group discussion. I'm going to move forward. So when it comes to defining your EVP, as mission-driven impact organizations, you all have brands that you're known for. This is your external vision, but what is your internal? So I'd like for folks to note 1 to 2 things you want to be known for in regards to your culture specifically. So is it accessibility, inclusion, transparency, equity? Just 1 to 2 words that you really want to be known for. And if you're stuck, refer back to your notes of what you want your compensation program to say about you. And it's really just 1 to 2 priorities. Okay. Anyone wanting to share, willing to share? Yeah.
Can I share an example too?
Yeah, please.
So for me, I wrote 2 things of equity and a living wage. One thing that I critique about a bit with my organization is that when there's a need for last minute staffing, we call for a agency support, but we also have a relief team as well. Unfortunately, a bit of the hypocrisy of that is that relief staff are also under the union as well, but their hourly rate is significantly lower than what we're willing to pay out for agency staff. And it gets a little bit inequitable and ironic that, it almost seems like becoming external is actually a better compensation package and EVP than being internal with us.
Yeah. That is definitely a good priority to work on. I'm going to comment on that later. I'm just holding. Yeah.
So for, we all work with vulnerable populations, and I employ a lot of people with lived experience. And so even though we train to meet people where they're at, I think a lot of managements don't meet their staff where they're at.
Yeah.
And so understanding better just, when to give time and take days off or before it gets to a critical point of people needing to take leave. Your this is a person-by-person basis as opposed to just sort of some standard rule of how you handle your staff.
Yeah, that's an excellent priority to work on as well, around designing specifically for the unique realities and lived experiences of your team. You're going to know that best. And the reason I kind of identify 1 to 2 things to be known for is we're not going to be able to achieve everything all at once. So what is a specific thing that you're going to work on, say, this year or next year? And then you can have kind of that new priority. But centering in that 1 to 2 thing will really help create your plan. Okay, great. So when it comes to designing philosophy, we're going to reflect a bit deeper into the culture. So I have a few reflection-based questions that I'm going to be asking. And these are questions I actually ask when kicking off project work with new organizations. I like to call them a bit meta. It's really kind of getting to the understanding of how you want to pay and how you think about pay. And it's intended to identify that EVP so that we can design a compensation program that's unique but also defensible. So let's walk through a few questions, starting with behaviors, and feel free to make notes. So what are the behaviors valued in your organization? So think about the people that do really, really well on your team, or the people you really want to keep. How did they exhibit work? What do you value about them? Make note of that. And then how would you describe your team culture today? Is it iterative, transparent, data-driven, inclusive, flexible, community-based? just key descriptors of how you would describe yourself. You can also make notes of the elements you actually want to see changed. So maybe you have silos on your team currently, or you're dealing with issues around disseminating information, or you have issues with collaborating with different teams, or your standards aren't being met. Make note of that as well. And what does working on your team actually look like? So does it look collaborative? Do you have a team of deep specialists or people with lived experiences? Do you have a team of generalists that can kind of jack of all trades? They can do all the things. What does that kind of look like? And then when hiring, what kind of behaviors do you look for? Is it adaptive, continuous learning? And then in terms of how you want team members to show up, what are those behaviors that you look for? Is it initiative, growth mindset, communication? Okay, and then lastly, what behaviors do you want to see more of? Okay, I'm not going to ask folks to share on this one just because I think it's a little, gets into the weeds, but was this pace okay? Is there anything that I could help clarify or revisit? No? Okay, I'm going to take the silence as we're all good. Okay, so to put this in action, I'm going to use a mock sample, Meet Garden Club. This is a fictional case study. So Garden Club is a nonprofit organization serving multiple regions across Ontario. Right now, there are 40 full-time employees as well as seasonal volunteers. And Garden Club is on the mission to help reintegrate community members through the power of gardening and community gardens. So we're going to use Garden Club as our example in putting each section of the philosophy into action. So Garden Club's culture, their mission here is to integrate people who have experienced and are currently experiencing homelessness within community through a community garden program. They value inclusion, community, and accessibility. In terms of what they want to see from their team, they want to see collaboration, initiative, proactiveness, relationship building, flexibility, and team first. And then Garden Club also has a desired atmosphere of building a team of community advocates and partners and collaborating with supporting skill development and finding joy and purpose in their work. So now that we have all of this grounded in our friends at Garden Club, we're now going to look at how to actually leverage this EVP into making decisions. And that's where we get into your guiding principles. So in terms of creating your guiding principles, we're first going to root in your values. So we've already articulated your values here, and we've identified 1 to 2 priorities of how you want to achieve your EVP. So the last step is actually describing that action. So how are you going to bring those priorities to life? So let's take a live example. Can someone share a priority that they have for their EVP and what they value? Sorry? Does anyone want to share a priority they have within their own EVP and what they value in their organization? So like an organizational value. Yeah. Equity, great. And then in terms of priority, do you have a specific priority you want to see happen for equity?
Was mentioned, we both add unionized staff and non-unionized. How do you make sure
there's equity between
that global feeling of equity between everything?
Yeah, awesome. So in terms of that guiding principle, my immediate reaction is if we're going to work on equity between union and non-union, we're not against each other, we're trying to work together. So with that said, what if we, create living wage for all, and that's a minimum, and that includes unionized workers. This is just an example, but maybe that is permitted in your collective agreement, or maybe you're able to get that funding to bring those salaries up immediately, and maybe you don't, and maybe that's actually a phased approach, so that in the next 2 years, you have an agreement in place where everyone at least the more junior levels or your part-time workers are at least brought up to that living wage. So you're creating that equity across. And then you start putting in parameters to get unionized and non-unionized workers on a similar wage grid, as an example. And that'll take time. And that's why I keep saying it's a phased approach, where maybe next year you bring everyone up to living wage for the more your level 1 and level 2 staff. And then you work on your level 3 and level 4 staff, as another example.
If I can engage.
Yeah, please.
That's actually pretty good at our level, like we just negotiated a collective agreement and they have good conditions.
Nice.
We're well positioned. It's more like all the other stuff outside of the pure salary. How do you create all of those other extra total rewards opportunity that the staff in the shelters, the staff on the road, the people working night shift feel that they benefit from all the other rewards option that, let's say we have like summer schedule for staff, they can benefit from that, exactly. There's a bunch of those things. How do you
create, you raise a really good question. So the question for folks that may not have heard it is, how do you create equity with total rewards? So maybe summer staff get summer hours or more flexible hours, and maybe staff on the ground are not getting that same benefit. And I want to preface by saying equity is not equality. So we're not trying to create the same programs for everything, but say you have flexible working hours for one side of your staff. How can you allow for flexible working hours for the other side of staff? So, does that mean adding more team members to allow for more of a rotation to happen? Or does that mean introducing flex hours within those staff members? I know that scheduling is different for those types of workers, but how can you create more opportunity for them to take on more flex? Or, if the organization can, is there like gifted days that the organization can provide? I've seen that even gifted 1 or 2 days have made massive leaps of faith in some of those areas as well. So once again, not equality, but introducing the similar concepts throughout and starting in baby steps. Maybe you give everyone 1 gifted day, and then you say, okay, this is how we're gonna allow or create for more flex. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So let's look at our friends at Garden Club. These are their values, these are their expected behaviors, and in terms of their guiding principles, they first wanted to leverage trust. So because they're community-based, they're working with a lot of different people, they want to make sure that they're rooting everything in trust. So in order to do that, they're using reputable market data to inform the wage grid, and they're using transparent grids, as well as a process to look at how pay is defined and adjusted. Also, what's important to them is community. So building community takes time and expertise. So they've decided that their wage grade is going to specifically benefit tenure, because they believe that with tenure, you're building more deeper relationships with community members, you're building more trust with community members. So they want to make sure that's recognized as part of their salaries. And then lastly, a core principle for them was well-being. So they want to make sure their total rewards package prioritizes mental health, flexibility, work-life balance, as well as being a living wage employer. So especially since they are community-oriented, they want to make sure they're offering or prioritizing that additional mental health benefit as their one kind of core benefit offering. Okay. And then lastly, transparency. So the good thing is all of you folks as nonprofits are a bit ahead of the curve. A lot of you have already been posting your hiring ranges or ranges in general on job descriptions, which is really great. But with new pay compliance coming into place, this is becoming a hot topic conversation. and likely also adding to employees asking and looking at different salaries and wanting to match that. But transparency is a journey as well, so it's important for organizations to decide how transparent they actually want to be. So you can be very intentional about what you're actually sharing. So of course, with pay compliance law coming in, we definitely want to meet the legal requirements, and that should be part of your transparent goals. However, my personal perspective on transparency is that transparency doesn't mean access to any and all information, but rather it actually pertains to useful and meaningful information, and this requires education. So say you're posting your ranges externally, but there hasn't been really an internal conversation or discussion with the team on what those ranges mean and how pay is even defined, or how that range even came to be. And then you're only kind of meeting the legal requirements. So your employees are seeing, okay, I can see that my range or my wage grade is here, but I've never received a conversation on where my max is, but I'm kind of doing the math myself and then bringing that to my manager. And it's already a bit of like a defensive, almost hostile conversation because they're coming in with like a, you owe me this because this is what I've seen in the market. Whereas if there was more conversation and regular manager one-on-ones or more career development opportunities, or it becomes part of the company or organizational culture to discuss it this way, not to say that they'll completely agree per se, but at least they have that education to kind of come from that shared understanding. For me personally, I always like to get teams in that position where we're sharing all job pay ranges, at least internally. So, you know, all of your wage grids are accessible, but it means that your staff also really understand those wage grids. Like I said before, and we'll get into this, the biggest kind of thing that I see for nonprofits is that you have a single wage grid and everyone's kind of compressed on that wage grid. If you do that and you are doing that, really important to communicate to staff why that is and what your job evaluation process was like and how those decisions were made. It's a good opportunity for staff to be like, hey, I don't think my job actually matches here. It's actually really helpful feedback because then you can kind of build a process down the line with them, with their feedback in mind, so that you can start separating out your wage grids.
Just to, is there any sort of average or like good sort of range that a job should fall within?
Yes.
Like the right, yeah, because I mean.
Ta-da! Before I move on, yeah?
Yeah, before you go there, I'm just curious, when you talk about transparency of wages, does that include management wages?
Oh yeah, it does.
Sorry, the question though, that you post everybody's, but you're saying in the share the, I wanted to clarify even in the share the position, do you mean like in the band, this is all of it? Like all the money we spend in this band, or is it by position, or do you mean people's salaries?
Very good question. So sharing pay positions is something unique to you. So what that means is I, Trisha, make $100,000, for example, and everyone knows I make $100,000 and I'm in this grid. That is information that is confidential and private to staff, and that is a learning curve. I will say I'm a proponent of that information, but I do acknowledge that that takes a lot of education and a lot of time to get people bought into that, because not everyone is comfortable disclosing that information, right? And you want to also respect those boundaries. There's also cultural nuances around pay. So there are areas to respect there, and you know, that's a journey. But you can still share the grids themselves, and that I believe should include management as well. Meaning, so all the way from your junior staff, all the way to, you know, management staff, as well as C-suite staff, you're seeing the ranges as a whole. But I don't necessarily think you have to roll out placements as part of that. That requires more work and education.
Sorry, I thought I would add in that, like for example, with our organization, most of that transparency is already there. Anyone that is C-suite is identified by the sunshine list.
Yeah.
But then anyone that's hourly only there's no range. It's just that set portion. So it's just that sweet spot in more management or senior management where there is a range and it's undisclosed, but anyone that's at the top or at the front line, it's been quite transparent.
That's awesome.
I'm not sure about other provinces, but
Yeah, it's true. And something, before I get to your comments, something else that I really encourage organizations to do is use a ratio approach. So take the salary, the minimum salary of your, let's say, level 1 team member and the maximum salary of your C-suite person, and what's the ratio? And I typically like to say it should be a 1 to 5. So that means your C-suite person should not be paid 5 times more, or maximum is paid 5 times more than your most junior team member. And that's a good way to kind of see what kind of compression you're creating. Could be contentious because that's when you're realizing, oh, we are paying lots in the C-suite. And something I will note is that recently C-suite salaries have increased significantly, which no knock to that. We love to see it. We'd love to see that kind of cut across all wage tables, so not just executives and C-suites, but we are seeing a significant increase in leadership salaries. Sorry, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, can you explain, this sounds kind of like a stupid question, but can you explain?
No stupid
the rationale
questions.
Behind the transparency?
Yeah.
And do you ever find it to negatively impact culture?
Good question. So in a nutshell, pay transparency law is set to support pay equity. So of course we know that there's a lot of disparity around pay equity. Right now we report on gender-based pay equity, but we're not even considering racialized pay equity and other different intersectional identities. So this is really meant to just put forward, this is what we're paying, and we're trying to bridge that gap with pay equity in a nutshell. Now in terms of cultural deterrence, I don't believe that pay equity causes harm to cultures. I believe that it puts organizations accountable for their decisions. So it could be contentious because we've never maybe had those conversations before, and now we're being told that we have to have these conversations now and build pay structures and start getting really kind of systematic about compensation, and that's uncomfortable, and it, rubs people differently based on their own experiences with compensation. But in the long run, I believe that it's actually a cultural addition and a positive factor, and it helps kind of really double down on that EVP that we've been talking about.
Just to follow up on that, I'm particularly talking about the C-suite. So in terms of the equity piece, totally understand that on the level.
Oh yeah.
But in terms of the C-suite level, right? That seems to be the area that could cause negative cultural implications in terms of the staff team, right? To see, well, why are they getting so much more, especially when you're saying that those salaries have increased significantly. Just curious, like that piece alone, whether that transparency is required.
It's not required, no.
From your perspective, it should be.
From my perspective, I think it should happen because once again, it's opening a can of worms for sure, but it's an important dialogue to have. If organizations are making the conscious decision to, let's say, pay 5x or 6x more, why is that? And if the answer is, oh, it's market data, okay, let's explain the market data. Let's look at the market data, and then let's look at other market data. Because if we're saying the market data is also saying someone with lived experiences should get paid $30,000, and that's well below living wage, do we then agree with the market data, and where should we make adjustments to make sure we're aligning with our value of equity, right? And maybe we say C-suite is getting paid at that $400,000 mark, for example, but maybe we believe in trying to bridge that gap as close as possible. So we increase lower salaries a bit higher to try to bridge that gap. So maybe our minimum isn't $50,000. Maybe our minimum is actually $60,000 to get closer to bridging that gap. It's just like different mechanisms that we can take. I'll take one more question.
I was just going to ask you, when you say do market comparison, in my experience, have found over the last 30 years, it's impossible for nonprofits to be competitive with the market. And for profits. It's, I don't know where the money's going to come from. It isn't going to fall out of the sky. So some other area is going to suffer because either it's going to be your maintenance budget or, something is going to suffer if you try to compete with market salaries.
Your market though can be comparable to your organization. Like we look at a specific market ourselves, like we work in this realm and what are others in the same market paying. So that's what we do there, but yeah.
It's true. Yeah. Your market's going to be specific to your industry. I have worked with organizations that actually try to align with tech. For some organizations that can, not to say they're paying like market average for tech roles, but they're actually aligning to P25 in tech industry amounts because there may be tech adjacent or they're trying to compete with that type of talent, and they're aligning more to that. Sorry, I know you had a question.
Okay, sorry. So we're in a really tricky spot right now
Mm.
where we grew from like 10 programs to 65 plus programs.
Wow.
Really rapidly.
Yeah.
We don't have a pay scale, but we have like 200 employees and it's very transparent. So now people are pissed because they're comparing, like they can compare, right? And it's like, it doesn't make any sense because there isn't really any sense behind it. And I'm just wondering if you're going to touch on like how to implement a pay scale when people are already being paid and like based on money difference.
Yeah. The short answer to this is if you have the internal resources to kind of navigate that, we have to design a new pay system, create a phased approach to get everyone into the new minimums, red circle people that are above, right?
That's more so the issue is that people are making more than they should be compared to the organization, right? Like the structure of the organization. And can you reduce pay?
No, we can't reduce pay. But for the folks that are red circled, it's not all doom and gloom. So first we have the conversation, right? Second is what are the other opportunities that can happen here? So for some of the folks that are red circled, maybe it's just the development of 1 or 2 competencies to help them move up or get promoted if you have that available to you. But for others, you know, maybe they want to maintain that deep specialist, they don't want to move up, they're happy with that level. As part of the new wage grid development, maybe we don't cap wage grids. Maybe we actually make them tenure-based, for example, so that we're not capping years of expertise. And then maybe we introduce performance bonuses if your funding agreements allow for that. I know that's not unanimous, but it can be allowed in some agreements. So then that way we're not progressing pay based on performance. We're maybe progressing pay on tenure and then adding that additional performance factor. It's not going to be perfect because some red circled individuals will remain red circled and we can't really have a plan for that necessarily. But first step, conversation. Second step, growth plan. Third step, creating that system to not cap people out accidentally. You might lose 1 or 2 people, but hopefully we're still communicating it in the way that they're kind of understanding the new system. Yeah. We are coming close to time, folks, so I'm going to move forward. I did not realize. Sorry, I have not been keeping time. So just an individual's question here around the hiring range. So is there a best practice around how much of the range you should be posting? I believe there is, and I call this a hiring range. So this is where you post the minimum range of the salary, and then you determine the max point of your salary. So it's not to say that you're posting the entire range. Instead, you're posting maybe the minimum amount of range. And what I like to say, I like to post up to 40% of the range. So you're posting 0% all the way to 40%, and that is your hiring range. And what that means is that you're bringing employees on board or new hires on board that will not hit the midpoint. They're not kind of being brought up at the midpoint, so you're leaving lots of room for that progression. But then also you're ensuring that there's pay parity between your new hires as well as existing team members. So that's the thing here. I can see some faces being like, we're not able to attract the talent we need at that 40%. I'm assuming that is a question I often get. The hope is that when you do redesign your wage grids and you're thinking about the amount you kind of have to move and bump up salaries, we're already considering that. But say you're looking at hiring somebody that should be at the midpoint, then we actually create definition of what that new hire should have, what competencies do they need. So if you're hiring someone at the midpoint, the assumption is that that individual can hit the ground running, do the thing, has all the expertise they need to make significant impact in your organization. If your candidate matches that description, okay, you can be a little flexible there, but generally speaking, you can bring someone on within the minimum to the hiring maximum range itself. Okay.
Just, sorry. My question was just, is there, and I don't want to take up too much time, but is there like a range for like a role from start to finish that's normal? Like, is it like 20,000 is too?
Oh, good question. Okay. So just to clarify, say you have a level 1 range, and your question is, what is the distance of the range?
Yeah, like what's normal for a distance?
Yeah, good question. So it depends what you have. If you have a wage grid, do you have a wage grid or a scale, like a salary band?
What, I don't even know what the difference is.
So a wage grid, yeah. So if you have a regular salary band, it's like your minimum, midpoint, maximum. Here is your band. You make the decision. You want to figure out how you pay people. In terms of how big that band should be, it depends on the level. So when I design salary bands, I design level 1 and level 2. So your junior team members as well as your kind of intermediate team members, about a $30,000 spread. And then when you get to level 3, your intermediate team members, that's when I bump it up to about $40,000 or even $50,000 spread. And then when you get to senior, it's a larger spread. And you create a consistent formula to allow that spread to happen. And from a compensation terminology, that's called your range spread. But if you have a wage grid, that's when you have that step-by-step tenure-based progression. So year 1, you start at $50,000. Year 2, you literally add 3%, and time over time, you like grow 3% all the way up to like year 30. So there's no ambiguity with how someone is progressing. It's literally the step is there. Someone has 15 years of experience. Okay, I see it on the grid. That's what they get. You're welcome. Yeah. Okay.
You gonna ask a question?
Let me hear it.
Not like, I don't feel like that range is by any means realistic for most people in this room.
Sure.
Not-for-profit industries.
Yeah.
So like what would be, I'm thinking of like, I know that that's not possible. And if I go back to my organization and say this, they're gonna be like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
So I just think like, what would be the ideal for like a field in which that $30,000 range is not realistic for one position?
And to clarify, the ranges are too high, the spread is too high?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's where I would see a wage grid.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Share, if I can.
Yeah, please.
The Charity Village has done a really good not-for-profit survey that it costs about $150 to get the full not-for-profit spread, and internally, I used those with our government funder and with our board to grade things into better alignment.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you mentioned that because I have worked with nonprofit organizations that have been able to adapt or adopt the $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 range spreads. We use Charity Village, we use other surveys. So once you have the data to back it, you can once again create that phased approach to help get your approval eventually.
Sorry, I know we're out of time, but I'm going to say something that's unpopular, but I think it's really important I say it. It's just, at the Charity Village, I fought really hard against that range because I think that we as an industry really undervalue our staff, undervalue our work, and we do not make ourselves competitive to every other market. We are not allowed to, we're not able to attract the talent that we need to attract. And I think this is a matter of us starting to push back because I don't want to, so I was told to go to Charity Village and say, here am I, what is your salary range? And I said, I'm not doing that because I'm not comparing shitty salaries to shitty salaries. I'm not doing it, right? So what I want to do is I want to go to the market and say, if I want to attract that talent, how much is it going to cost?
Yeah.
We need to, in my opinion, not my organization's opinion, but my opinion, is that we need to stop doing that to ourselves and to recognize that, maybe that means that we have to make the hard decision to service less people. But we as an industry need to start going to our funders and saying, we can't service that many people any longer because we have to pay our staff properly. So that's just my pushback on it because I'm just so frustrated.
Yeah.
This whole thing, and we are doing it to ourselves. And people in this room, if you're setting the salaries, are doing, we are responsible, and myself included.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, and that's also what I'm seeing with organizations, just because at Bright and Early, we work at the intersection of tech as well. And a lot of our clients that come to us say, just give me tech salaries. I want to see what tech is paying, just because we know tech is paying significantly higher. But as well as, I'm sure a lot of you folks are comparing salaries with municipal governments and governments in general. So sometimes we'll look at that and say, these are exactly what your competitors are paying, match it, or do something comparable or create a phased plan, and then we can leverage your EVP on that as well. Yeah.
Just to add, no one happens to us we are funded by a municipality, we bring on great staff, we train them, the municipality takes it.
Yeah, I have heard this. I have heard this.
I'm so angry with it, so like I totally believe.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, totally.
I have heard this.
It happens to us all the time and it can't continue.
Yeah. You had your hand up back there. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I had the gentleman in the.
Just following on Heather a little bit, it's a nonprofit one as well. How often do you see nonprofits have to restructure as they do their value mapping and realize they're working?
A lot.
A lot,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So I'll feel good that. It's like we need better wages. We can't attract people for coach, for training, for meeting. We think we're bills.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not sustainable. So anyway, I feel like that's also something we need to grapple with. So
Well, and the sector is very gender based. So who's getting paid for these?
Mm-hmm.
We all know these things, so I really appreciate sort of being able to think about these logistical pieces, but I do think this sector, we are doing ourselves a disservice if we're not actually recognizing these bigger pieces that we do need to push back on, whether that's with our funder, our HR professionals, whether it's with whoever, so that we're not buying into something that is not going to benefit the sector.
Yeah, to add to that, so of course, Bright and Early, we are a third party, we're a consultancy, and what we often do is actually pitch this to boards and help gain approval for these organizations. And a lot of the times we do use different salary amounts, not just Charity Village, because $30,000 is not a living wage anymore by any means. And we at Bright and Early believe that like at a minimum, 55 should be kind of the standard. That's just the Bright and Early best practice that is above Ontario living wage, but that's something that kind of we've set. And we help teams kind of get to that, and then how to actually gain your board approval, but then also how to scale that across your org. Because it's not just your support roles, it's all the other roles that kind of scale with the level of expertise. And then, doing that phased approach of how you can get there. So we do a lot of work in kind of building that advocacy and buy-in.
Last time round for our budget, to go to the funder, this is municipal government for yourself. And one of the big things that came back from our team members was how I was starting on 10 days vacation, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Seriously, right? That's where we're at in Nova Scotia, that's where we're at, right? But a lot of non-profits, their entry-level vacation time is 10 days. The municipal government's entry-level vacation time is 15 days. So when I was doing last year's budget proposals, I went to the municipal government with the agreement of the board of directors, and I said, we're losing talent, we're losing skill set, because when we're interviewing for positions, even on at that level one, the entry level, the support workers, they're working in the transitional houses, and we're giving them 10 days, and they're like, well, if I go to this organisation, I'm going to go more, or we get trained up, they know the short-term gain is to use the non-profit as a stepping stone to government job, right? Yeah. So when I went to the government, they said, no, you're not going to do it, we'll find an organisation that will. And that's why we're in the position where this woman here had said that we're not just doing it to ourselves, but there's a culture in our society, within our funders, that forces to be like that, because we need to keep the plan going. We need to keep the organisation afloat. And it's like this whole thing, and it doesn't matter what position you're coming in on, we're trying to recruit leadership positions. It's the same for them. 10 days vacation, but they're coming from industry where they're only 25 days. You're like, oh, I'm not coming to you for 10 days.
Yeah.
So we're trying to flex it a little bit. So okay, what would you need to get ready to encourage you to come on board?
Yeah. I think in those cases, I mean, you folks know your constraints the best, and you folks understand what you're seeing in the market. Then we get hired and kind of help package that messaging, as well as attach all of the market research and data of different industries, align it to that culture and what you're trying to do, and then kind of submit it to the board. And we find that typically we can gain the traction from there. I don't love that that's what happens, but that's where we can leverage kind of the third-party agencies to support you in that mission. But yeah, like you have all the market data and you're seeing the right things, like 10-day salary. No, I would say 15 to 20 days is now kind of standard. We're really approaching 20 days at this point. But like, once again, leveraging that market data, whether it's your own research or, engaging with an agency to help you with that.
So what's happened is we're having to actually look at what we're getting funded for, where are those red circles around, what budget components, what are we willing to sacrifice to redivert those funds into the vacation side, so that we can actually accommodate that side of the thing. And it's proven incredibly challenging.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to move forward. So when looking at total compensation, we all kind of know the cash and non-cash. We all been talking about it. So I'm going to move forward from this slide. Now, in terms of how to calculate salaries, because this is something that we have been chatting a little bit about, first and foremost, job matching and get the data. I have here using reputable data, either through databases or surveys, but this is also your opportunity to use comparable data or data that you are inspired by. So like I've been saying, a lot of nonprofit organizations that do work with us are very interested in looking at tech salaries, and we provide that data, or other industries. Because just because you're in the nonprofit space doesn't mean you have to align with nonprofit salaries. It's very interesting to just see where data is coming from, and especially in today's kind of digital age with a lot of transferable skills, people are coming from all different backgrounds and industries as well. I believe in using databases or surveys here. Of course, on the ground market peer research is good, but once again, they're points to help inform. And then in terms of job families, so this is what I was kind of speaking to around, I see a lot of nonprofit organizations creating that single wage grid, or creating that unified salary band that's supposed to be applicable for all of their roles. And this is one of the biggest tension points I see. Rather, if we do the job families first, so a job family is essentially a department. And when we're doing the job evaluation process of understanding the differences between the roles, we should be starting to separate that out as early as possible. So even if you have 10 roles that are the exact same and one unique one, create the 2 separate job families and build those different salary bands and wage grids now, so that we're not compressing people down the line. And if you're in a position where you've unified everything and now you're feeling the tension, this is a time to start separating them out. There is a really big change management component here, because people might get different salaries, or they're frozen, or there's going to be massive budget changes. But that's just the work that has to be done, or else you're kind of going to get stuck in this cycle of not being able to afford the talent that you need. So if there's one takeaway you get, start separating out your job families as soon as you possibly can. And then we build the salary bands. So when we separate out the job families, then we can create a salary band using the formulas. I won't get super technical here, but essentially every role has their own market rate, and then that is tied to the organization's size and scale. It is up to you on where you want to tie your data to. So let's say you can filter it down based on your industry size, your scale, your funding, your communities that you serve, or you can say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to create it as general as possible to get the most data as possible. So it just depends on your unique circumstance. I always like to use a broad set of data so that we can make the most informed decision. But then we create bands or wage grids per job family, and that way we're creating unique salary structures for each family itself. So it's not necessarily for each role, it's for each department. It's a bit more of an administrative load, but once again, we're now able to look at the value of each department and look at the value of each role and compensate accordingly. And then lastly, auditing and refining. So you do all of this work to build the salary bands. It's definitely not one and done. You do have to review it on an annual basis. I always say you should set aside at least 3 to 4% a year for kind of your cost of living, cost of labor increases. This is not including performance. So performance is going to be dependent on your culture, your funding agreement, how you kind of drive those decisions. Some organizations don't tie performance and pay together. Some organizations do. So that depends on your employee value proposition. But either way, I always say 3 to 4% is a sweet spot. And then you should be looking at kind of adding that or aging your bands year over year with that amount. Okay. And then in terms of salary adjustments, as mentioned, how you recognize performance is completely dependent on the culture you want to drive. So I've worked with organizations that do not believe in tying performance and pay. They have believed that it's exploitive and they don't want to drive that specific culture. So they've decoupled it, but they have a pretty high base salary or high relative to their industry so that they can hire the talent that they want. And then performance is actually recognized through feedback instead, for example. Some organizations say, no, we want to start recognizing performance in a very specific way, and then maybe use a bonus structure for that. I usually advise against nonprofits especially to move people up a band based on performance, just because it's less predictable. So it's more challenging for your budget. And once again, if we're talking with the funders, I'd rather you folks set aside the amount for the year over year cost of living and labor raises than something a little more arbitrary like performance. But then promotions are factored in, and that obviously has to be part of your budget cycle. So these are the considerations to think about promotions themselves. So in terms of how much people typically set aside for that, usually I have nonprofit clients setting aside about 10% year over year for promotions themselves. For my tech clients, in case that's interesting, we have usually about a 15% set aside in terms of budget for promotions. But promotions, have to be available. They're not just kind of offered. But that is something to consider in your budgets as well. Okay. And then coming near the end, sorry, I'm kind of speeding through this. I want to get through all the points. But in terms of how compensation decisions are made, these are kind of the questions you should be asking when it comes to thinking about how comp should be changed. And then these are some considerations that you can have. So first and foremost, having a compensation committee, assigning decision makers, that's super, super important. Even if you're consensus-based, really important to have key decision makers responsible for compensation, and making sure that they're informed and rooted by pay equity and market data, etc. Okay. And here is an example of our friends at Garden Club with total rewards. So this is kind of how it all really comes together. And then our last point of our EVP is career. So I wanted to show a summary of what your levels could look like. So this is kind of the definitions that we typically design for organizations. I had a question back there about org structures and potential changes. I'm going to be here, so we're welcome to discuss if you'd like to have that discussion. But these are some high-level overview definitions that you can add to your team. The specific difference here is you see IC and M. ICs are your individual contributors, so your specialists, maybe your deep specialist, your technical specialist. And then you have your M, which are your people leaders or people managers. Really important to separate those tracks out because you don't want to pigeonhole people into management. Not everyone wants to be a people manager, and if we're only creating one way up, we're accidentally promoting people into managers that don't want to be managers. So a very immediate takeaway is to separate those two functions. You can still have the same pay bands, but just separate. Okay, and then in terms of your constraints, so we talked a lot about budget. I have here, when it comes to rooting in your promises in your EVP, set aside about 3 to 4% year over year in terms of what's feasible and reasonable. For your board, communicating that EVP and gaining buy-in early and investing in a third party where you need it. I know that kind of sounds like a bit of a pitch, but I do see success in that. But for organizations that do have that relation with the board, have those conversations early. And in terms of competitors, I did hear a lot of questions about what if my peers or competitors are paying the exact same rate and then taking my talent. It does happen. It's very difficult to control that. However, this is where you can ground in your advantage. Your peer or municipal governments are not offering necessarily the same benefits you are, the same impact you are. So grounding in that EVP. And then in terms of speed of change, that's where reviewing your compensation process annually, iterating when necessary, and then making changes based on feedback. So if your team is asking, hey, this isn't feeling right, I don't think I'm being paid fairly, making a change based on that feedback and then communicating that. So, we've heard employee feedback, here are the changes we're making, here's where we want to get to. So here are the points around gaining the buy-in. So identify those key decision makers, bringing your team along the way, committing to making change, and then communicating. And then in summary, this is where you can use that compensation strategy as your tool. You can address your constraint in phases. So I always say that there is a crawl, walk, run approach. We all want to kind of sprint all the time, but there are baby steps in place. And even with the pay transparency journey, there is education that's required to get people bought into that. So start by crawling. And if all of this is like, deeply intimidating and scary, start in phases. I love phased approaches so that people kind of understand the vision. Gaining that buy-in and bringing people along early. So if this is kind of inspiring you to make changes, communicating that to your leaders and start creating that plan, and then invest in support where needed. So with that is it. I don't know if I have time for questions. No? Okay.